Okay, let's start. I would like to call to order the Malibu City Council special meeting for Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. This meeting is being held via teleconference due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate everyone's patience while we navigate the Zoom meeting process. Council members and city staff are participating from remote locations, and all votes will be taken by roll call. Members of the public can participate in the meeting or watch it by going to malibucity.org/virtual meeting. At this screen, you can click on the tab to either just watch the meeting or sign up to speak on particular items or item. You will only be able to speak during the meeting if you follow the instructions at malibucity.org/virtual meeting. Once the item is called, no further speaker signups will be allowed, so please make sure you visit malibucity.org/virtual meeting early to sign up to speak and download the Zoom application as needed. The city clerk will call on those who have signed up to speak when the item is called, so you must be present in the Zoom meeting to be recognized. Council members, as normal, if you have comments to make during this meeting, please raise your hand and I will call on you in turn so we can make our discussion clear for the record and for the public. Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Fair.
Here.
Councilmember Silverstein.
Here.
Councilmember Euring.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Grisanti.
You're muted, Paul.
Here and unmuted.
And Mayor Pearson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. I'll now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right.
Okay, ready, begin. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Can I have a motion on approval of the agenda?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, and well, I see that Bruce actually seconded first.
Karen spoke up. That's cool.
Okay, Karen is the second. Can we have roll call on the approval of the agenda?
Mayor Pro Tem Grisanti.
Yes.
Councilmember Fair.
Yes.
Councilmember Silverstein.
Yes.
Councilmember Euring.
Yes.
Mayor Pearson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, I have a question before we proceed. I believe there is a couple of people signed up to speak, or I think that wanted to, and I don't have anywhere for public speaking on this item. So
Mayor Pearson,
Yes.
So it's the same standard that we would normally do unless the council would like to do it differently for this. That staff will provide the staff presentation. We'll hear from public speakers and then the council can deliberate unless you'd like to do it differently, and we're happy to do whatever you want.
I think it's perfect and I love it. And let's did someone else speak?
Mayor Pearson, if I could
Okay.
also just give a brief report on the posting of the agenda before you get into the item.
Just getting to that. Thank you, Kelsey. Can I have a report on the posting of the agenda, please?
The agenda for this meeting was properly posted on April 16th, 2021.
Excellent. Thank you. We are now on to 1A, proposed budget for fiscal year 21-22. And can we have the presentation, please?
Yes, I'm going to start. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first go round of the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. Lisa and I are going to tag team on the presentation. I'm going to start by giving kind of an overview of the budget process and the kind of nuts and bolts of budgeting. And then Lisa will take over and go over what is in the actual document before you tonight. We thought it would be helpful for the newer council members to get a pretty robust and comprehensive presentation on the budget. And I'd like to start off by acknowledging all of our staff members and our department heads who have worked to assemble this budget. A lot goes in behind the scenes to get it to the point where we can present it to the public and to the council. Just a lot of behind the scenes work on it. So thank you to all of them, particularly Lisa and the finance staff who have done so much for this. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So our budget schedule, as you know, we're here in April. So we start in January, actually looking at the prior year revenue and expenditures and start developing the budget that we put together for this round. It is what we do is we use actuals that we have for the current year through the end of March, and then project out what the current fiscal year amounts will be in order to develop some proposed numbers for the upcoming fiscal year. And as we go through the budget process in May and June, those numbers get refined as we get more actual numbers in. This is my 17th budget that I've done for the city, so there's a lot of things that are, similar year to year, and so we can use a lot of those trends as we develop, particularly our revenue budget. So after this evening, what we're hoping for from the council is for you to, ask us questions, get more information if you need it, look through the city's work plan, give staff direction on what you want or don't want on the work plan, and discuss how the actual numbers tie into that work plan. And then staff will refine it, present it to the Administration and Finance Subcommittee in May. The Administration and Finance will also meet to discuss the general fund grant applications and hear from those applicants and make recommendations back to the council. And then in May, the budget is presented to the city council at a public hearing. That's a noticed public hearing. We advertise it in the newspaper and in addition to our regular agenda process. And then the council needs to adopt the final budget before the start of the fiscal year, which is July 1st. And then, as you'll recall, we do bring quarterly financial reports to the council on a quarterly basis. The first quarter comes in November. In January, you'll review the mid-year just like you did this year, and it comes back again as this process goes through. So there's lots of opportunities for the council to look at the budget, and always can bring it forward at any time if there's a need to. Next slide, please. So one of the things that is very, very important, and you'll hear both me and Lisa touch on this several times throughout this evening, is the importance of having a balanced budget. And a balanced budget means that the amount that the city is spending on general government operations, so kind of ongoing expenses, payroll, public safety, operations, maintenance, is less or the same as the amount of revenue that's coming into the general fund for that fiscal year. And as a result of the Woolsey fire and COVID, we're now heading into our second year where we don't have what is considered a balanced budget, meaning that we're having to use funds from our saving account, which is our reserves, in order to meet our ongoing operations. And we've done a great job in terms of finding fixes. So last year we were able to use funds from the Southern California Edison settlement. This year we're able to use the reserve that the council has set aside over this past few months. But it's not a sustainable way to maintain the city's budget. So you're again going to hear us say that a lot as we try to think forward to make sure that we do have a way of having a sustainable budget for the city. So of course, we look at the city's work plan and make sure that there's funding in the budget to do all the things that the council wants. We also take into account all of the ongoing operations of the city, sort of what I call the behind the scenes and not so glamorous things, but things that need to get done, like paying the bills or, serving the public. And so these are the things that we do in order to develop the budget. Next slide, please. Again, balanced budget. I'm going to be a broken record on this, but this is the key and the goal of developing the budget. Next slide, please. So this is the city's proposed organizational chart. It shows all of our departments and the areas of responsibility under each department. So certainly just something that we look at, and then each one of those areas are the budget numbers that you'll see before you this evening. Next slide, please. So in working through this budget, based on all the things that the city and city staff have been doing, we wanted to put together some metrics that shows the accomplishments of the things that don't get the ribbon cuttings, that don't get the buzz and the social media, but this city staff does a lot. I'm not going to read off all these numbers, but you're going to see over the next few slides just the huge amount of things every day at City Hall that people are getting done and doing to serve this community. Next slide, please. Some of the things that are just have changed a lot, particularly with COVID, is how we handle public meetings, the amount of behind the scenes and work and staff that it takes to keep all of these things working and run these things, the amount of invoices that come through the city, the amount of recruitments that we have, the amount of public records that we get, all of these things represent one of your city staff members doing their job in an efficient and helpful way to serve Malibu. And then certainly at the bottom of this page, not last down here, but definitely not least, is the amount of notifications that we provide out to the city on a regular basis regarding traffic and emergencies and whatnot. Next slide, please. And then the numbers of visitors, these reflect a more normal year than the one that we've just had in terms of the amount of visitors to parks and programs, but did want you to see how much we're doing, the amount of press releases that are going out, the amount of posts on our different social media channels, Facebook and Twitter, and we obviously have multiple accounts. And so I just really want to recognize everyone who has worked to make these numbers happen. It's a huge lift, and there's not a city staff who works at the city who doesn't do it with all of their heart and a smile on their face. And so I thought it was important, and we're more than happy to provide you all a hard copy of this so you can look at these numbers when there's more time to focus on it. Next slide, please. So the Administration and Finance Subcommittee, who right now is made up of Mayor Pearson and Councilmember Euring, their role in the budget is to review and discuss it. So again, after we meet tonight, it will go in about 2 weeks to them, and that gives them a chance to have a very deep dive in a little less formal format to ask more questions of staff and give recommendations back to the council on things that they're seeing. Throughout the year, the Administration and Finance Subcommittee also reviews any appropriation from the general fund that exceeds $10,000. And the point of that is to ensure that we maintain a balanced budget throughout the year. So we would hate to have the council adopt a budget at the beginning of the fiscal year and then in September, add all these expenses and all of a sudden we're skewed. So it's a check and balance system to make sure that we're staying on track. And then of course they meet for other administrative related matters as needed. Next slide, please. And so one of the things I wanted to just take a couple minutes to briefly go through, and I know you've seen all this as you've read through the budget staff report and the budget document, but I wanted to talk about the different types of revenue sources that cities get and what we can do with them. So the easiest way I always explain it is if you think of the general fund as colored with one type of money and all your other money is colored differently, and they can't be interspersed usually. So your general fund is what is used to pay for general city expenses, payroll, operations, and it can be used really for any governmental purpose. And then you have what we call special revenue funds, and those can only be used for specific funds, specific purposes. So here you'll see we've explained. So example, solid waste management can only be used for recycling and solid waste expenses. We can't use it to go and plant a tree, for example. So, but you can certainly use general fund to do either of those things. And so as we work through the budget development, what we do is look at all of our special revenue funds and try to plug those in wherever we can before we use that general fund revenue source. Because if we have a specific purpose and a funding source that meets it, we try to do that. Next slide, please. And the other thing that you'll see as we move through the budget is that in the prior fiscal years, because of shortfalls in general fund revenue, we were using up a lot of our special revenue funds. And so this year we're trying to go back to building up some reserves in there so those are available as needed for future years. The one fund I do want to touch on, or actually two here, are the Legacy Park project funds, and that is revenue that's collected from the commercial tenants around Legacy Park. And we use those funds primarily to pay the debt service associated with Legacy Park. However, even though it's tracked in a separate fund, which is called an enterprise fund, Legacy Park funds can be used for general fund operations and intermixed and transferred back and forth from the general fund. So in prior years, we have used those resources for clean water expenses or park operations. And again, have spent down that fund. So in future years, we want to start accumulating that fund a little more. So it's sort of like a backup to the general fund and designated reserve. And then our internal service funds are exactly what it sounds like. It's a charge that each department pays for things like using a car or using a computer. And again, we build up a reserve in those funds so that if we need to replace equipment, we have those reserves available. We don't always have to take it out of the general fund. Next slide, please. And so, I kind of jumped ahead of myself, but the use of the revenue you can see is very specific. So we try to use all of that wherever we can before we go and roll to the general fund or our blue money here in this slide. So that's kind of budgeting 101 real quick for all of you, and always happy to go into more detail if you need it. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, this is just another example of what those funds can be used for. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who is going to give you a bit of a briefing on what's in your budget for this year. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Like Riva, I want to thank the staff who worked very hard, the department heads who got me information on a moment's notice when I called them up and said, I'm trying to get this together, I need this from you. They were incredibly responsive, and our finance staff, including Renee Neerman, Joni Hand, Brenda Cho, and Leah Tucker, who helped put everything together, make Excel spreadsheets work, and really got us to where we are today. This is a big document that we're sharing with you, and we're giving you a high level overview, and everybody is here to help answer questions when we get through our presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about where we start. The city's budget is based on the expected revenue for the coming year. And at this point in the process, we project these revenues very conservatively. As Riva mentioned before, we're basing our numbers in this first pass on the actual revenue received through March 31st of this year. So that gives us our projections for where we're going to end the current year, and it helps us project the trends for next year. Certainly some of our revenue doesn't come in, exactly on a 12-month, spread out evenly throughout the year. So some numbers we have from outside sources, some we're still waiting on. And as we move through the process over the next 2 months, we will update our numbers as that information comes in. So where we stand right now for fiscal year 21-22 is we anticipate receiving approximately $80 million in revenue. And of that, $33.1 million are general fund revenue dollars. And in your budget book, you'll see there's a little bit more that I've not included in the chart. There's $1.5 million that we are expecting in FEMA and Cal OES reimbursements. Those don't necessarily match expenditures year to year. There is sometimes a delay. So we anticipate getting those, spread out over the next few years. Next slide, please. So many of our revenue sources have declined over the past year due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're projecting that those decreases will continue in fiscal year 21-22. We're going to monitor the economic trends. We participate in webinars that are hosted by the League and other sort of economic forecasters to really get a sense of what's going on. And again, we will update our budget accordingly. In terms of COVID costs to the city, where possible, we've sought funding from FEMA for COVID-related costs. As of September 15th of 2020, FEMA limited eligible expenditures. And luckily for everybody, in March, the American Rescue Plan was signed, and those funds will retroactively cover COVID-related costs from July 1st, 2020 on. Under that plan, right now, the city is slated to receive approximately $2.2 million. The first payment of $1.1 million will be received on June 11th of this year. The remaining $1.1 million will not be received for at least 12 months. And so we have not included that in next fiscal year's budget because we're anticipating that we might receive it in the very beginning of the following fiscal year. So the funds have been placed into a designated reserve because they're only going to be eligible to be used for certain costs. We're still waiting for guidance from the Treasury Department on the approved uses that are beyond the direct reimbursement for expenses that the city has incurred. And I imagine by the time we come back to you in May, hopefully we will have a little bit better guidance on what those funds can be used for, and we'll share that with you then. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of our general fund revenues. Property tax is the city's biggest source of revenue in the general fund, and in the next year accounts for approximately 44% of those revenues. Our other major tax revenue sources are sales tax, utility user tax, and transient occupancy tax, which together make up another 26%. Sales tax and transient occupancy tax have seen declines related to the COVID-19 restrictions. And we're anticipating, as I think I mentioned before, that those will probably continue through the next fiscal year. And licenses and permits and service charges are our next largest sources of revenue, and we're projecting those to be respectively at 9% and 10% of the total general fund revenue. Next slide, please. A review of general fund revenue over the past 10 years demonstrates the city's financial growth and stability prior to the Woolsey fire and the COVID-19 pandemic. The city began to see significant growth in fiscal year 2012-2013, with general fund revenue increasing from $21.6 million in fiscal year 2011-2012 to $25 million in fiscal year 2013-2014, and then to $33.6 million in fiscal year 2018-2019. In a normal year, we're conservative in budgeting and forecasting, and especially at this point in the budget process. We are projecting revenue to continue to be impacted due to COVID-19 this fiscal year and next. We're still waiting, as I mentioned before, there's still sources that are coming in, and we will adjust accordingly those projections as we bring the budget back over the next 2 months. Next slide, please. Assessed property value information is provided to the city from the Los Angeles County Assessor's Office and shows an assessed value of $18.5 billion. This represents a 4.6% increase over the previous year and a 59% increase over 10 years. The year prior to the Woolsey fire, the city's assessed property value increased at 7.3%. So even after the fire, and initially after the fire, both Reva and I were very concerned that we were going to see property taxes flatten out at the least and maybe dip a little. We just went from 7.3% increases to, we actually had a 4.6% increase last year, and we do again this year. The strength of the city's assessed values and subsequent property taxes have really helped the city weather the economic impacts of both the fire and the COVID-19 pandemic. It is the strength of these numbers that keeps us in a better position than many cities find themselves today. Next slide, please. The growth in secured property tax follows the same trend line as the city's overall general fund revenue, as well as the growth in the city's assessed property value. Malibu receives 7.04 cents of every property tax dollar paid. 10 years ago, the city received $7.1 million in property taxes, and last year that number was $11.6 million. Our conservative projections show that number as $11.9 million for the next fiscal year. And again, as we see the April payments come in and from property tax, we'll be able to see how this year is trending and may be able to adjust those numbers for next year. Next slide, please. The city's second largest tax revenue source is sales tax, which again has experienced growth over the years prior to the Woolsey fire and the COVID-19 pandemic. The city's major sales tax contributors are typically restaurants. And so again, the pandemic was particularly hard on those. As we all know, the restrictions hit those harder than many other sectors. And unlike, and I will point out, because we haven't had a chance to talk about sales tax, unlike other jurisdictions where the holiday season is their peak sales tax time, right? Everybody goes shopping for the holidays. In Malibu, it's reversed and it's the summer because that's the busiest season for visitors. And that's when we see people coming into town and eating at those restaurants and shopping in the shops. So it remains to be seen what will happen going forward. We're closely monitoring the guidance on COVID-19 restrictions from the state and the county. And even though we see things right now opening up, we're still projecting that those numbers will be decreased in the next year, and it will take a couple years for them to recover to where they were. The staff works with, we have a contract with HDL companies to monitor sales tax for us, and they help us develop these revenue projections. And in the next week or so, we will have a meeting with them to talk about the prior quarter's sales tax, and that they will update their projections, and those will be included again in further iterations of the budget. Next slide, please. The city's utility user tax revenue is projected to be slightly lower as well, with the annual revenue amount at $2 million. These taxes are levied on the charges paid by utility users, including electricity, gas, and telephone. The utility provider collects the taxes as part of their bills and remits the money to the city. With houses still in the process of rebuilding after the Woolsey fire and the closure of businesses due to the COVID-19 restrictions, these revenues have declined slightly as well. Next slide, please. Tax from hotels, motels, and short-term rental of private homes increased in the years prior to the Woolsey fire. Tax from hotels and motels was $2.3 million in fiscal year 2017-2018. The Woolsey fire and the COVID-19 pandemic have also impacted this revenue source. We are projecting revenue of $1.7 million in the current year and $1.9 million for the next year. Next slide, please. When the city first began collecting revenue from short-term rentals in 2009, it generated $100,000. Last year, revenues exceeded $3 million. The Woolsey fire has affected this revenue source as well, and the new short-term rental enforcement ordinance took effect on January 15th of this year, requiring all short-term rentals to have a permit with the city. As of this date, the city has issued 186 permits representing 225 dwelling units. Additionally, Malibu voters approved Measure T in November of 2020, raising the TOT from 12% to 15% effective January 1st, 2021. It's too early to tell how both these changes will affect future revenue. We are projecting revenue of $2.8 million for the current year and a very conservative projection of $1.9 million for next year. And that lower number is due to an anticipation of a hosted short-term rental ordinance and how that might affect revenues. Next slide, please. On February 8th, 2021, Council extended the fee waivers for the Woolsey fire rebuilds of primary residences through June 30th, 2022. The conservative projections for uncollected fees total $9.4 million over 3 fiscal years. And that's one of the reasons where you see revenues below expenses, because of course, we're not collecting money for those fees, but our ongoing expenses include staff time and consultant time to move the rebuilding process forward. Next slide, please. So the proposed expenditure budget, which we will go into next, is based on the council's priorities and work plan. The work plan for 21-22 is attached at the end of the budget and details the city's priorities and which departments will work collaboratively to achieve them. The City Council set its top 3 priorities for fiscal years 2019, 2020, and 2020-2021 as public safety, Woolsey fire recovery, and school district separation. We plan to go over the work plan in detail with the council after the formal budget presentation. And as you help us, guide us with your priorities on that work plan, we will then amend, if necessary, the budget that you have before you, and you will see that again in future iterations. Next slide, please. Total expenditures are projected at $89.7 million. The general fund expenditure budget is $42.5 million. This includes not only city operating expenses of $38.8 million in ongoing operating expenses. This is what Riva talked about, where we're balancing the budget. These are the things, keeping the lights in City Hall on, processing invoices, keeping an open public counter, serving the public. And so of those ongoing operating expenses, they're funded by $33.1 million in projected revenue and another $5.7 million from that $6.5 million designated reserve that was set aside by council for these expenses. It also includes expenses related to the Woolsey Fire disaster capital improvement projects that will ultimately be reimbursed by FEMA and Cal OES, and some one-time capital projects that are being funded with general fund designated reserve dollars. As we mentioned, the city's share of FEMA and capital projects has to come from us. This year, we are funding that $1 million share, which is the city's percentage. That's the one thing that's coming out in the current proposed budget from the SCE Woolsey Fire Settlement Fund. Other major expenses include $40.6 million of special revenue expenses, and those are capital projects, and those are not coming from the general fund. Those are coming from outside grants, other special revenue, as Riva explained, all those different pots of money. The Legacy Project Fund expenses are budgeted at $1.8 million. The Civic Center Water Treatment Facilities operating budget is projected to be $1.9 million. And all the expenses for the operating of that facility will be reimbursed through assessments from the connected property owners in phase 1. When phase 2 comes online, those ratepayers will also share in those operating costs. Next slide, please. This is worth calling out separately for everyone. The city has a high debt service payment that we're obligated to make every year. In fiscal year 2021-2022, the city must make debt service payments on Legacy Park, City Hall, Trancas Field, and the 2018 vacant land acquisition. And this is the first year that we're making that full payment for the land acquisition. And those debt service costs total approximately $4.3 million. Next slide, please. Public safety remains one of the city's highest priorities. Law enforcement is a major part of that public safety mission. The city will spend over $8.5 million on its contract with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department next year, which includes a little over $700,000 for the beach team in the summer. This represents an increase of 1.45% for the county's required administrative increase and liability trust fund. This is actually lower than in past years. I believe last year it was a little over 6%. And the contract expense is 22% of the city's annual operating budget. It is our single biggest expense. It should be noted that the new sheriff station at the Santa Monica College satellite campus is set to open most likely in fiscal year 2022-2023, and it could add up to $3 million to the city's annual sheriff contract. Next slide. In the prior fiscal year, significant reductions in expenditures across all budgets were made in response to projected revenue decreases from the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff salaries and benefits were moved from planning, building safety, environmental health, and public works to the Woolsey Fire budget and were funded for 1 year only by the SCE Woolsey Fire Settlement Fund. Increases in most department in fiscal year 2021-2022 are a result of moving these staff expenses back to their home departments. Many increased expenses are captured in the management and administration budget pages, and these include insurance costs, increased legal costs, and as I mentioned before, this is the first year of full debt service payment on the 2018 land acquisition. Next slide, please. The city has continued to prioritize the Woolsey Fire recovery. Staff and consultants have been dedicated to helping homeowners through the rebuilding process. To date, 302 applications have been approved by planning, 176 building permits have been issued, and 27 homes have been completed. And these numbers change constantly. You'll probably see them updated by the next time we come to you, which is a testament to the staff working in City Hall and how hard they are prioritizing this. And while staff time has been shifted back to home departments for budget purposes, the consultant services of $2.1 million will continue to be captured on this Woolsey Fire budget page so that we can track them separately. And these expenditures will no longer be funded from the SCE Woolsey Fire settlement funds and will come from the general fund. Next slide, please. The proposed budget includes funding for 87 full-time employees and the equivalent of 13.27 employees working as part-time staff. This is an increase of 6 full-time equivalent positions from the current year. And these positions include a grants administrator, an additional code enforcement officer, an administrative assistant in code enforcement, an associate civil engineer, a planning technician, and a recreation coordinator. The grants administrator and the associate civil engineer will be funded through grants and outside funding sources, not the general fund. And as you probably noticed, and we haven't gotten to capital projects yet, but we have a very ambitious capital project program this year. And those 2 positions will really help us navigate those projects and the reporting required and the funding tracking that we will need to achieve. We've also included a half-time fire safety liaison to provide more robust service and outreach to the community. This was something that had been included in the prior year's mid-year budget amendments, but we curtailed when COVID-19 hit and we were trying to reduce expenses. It had not been filled yet, so we put it on hold. We are recommending including it into the proposed budget. Additionally, the increase in part-time staff includes projected part-time staff for community services department, where we are hoping to see, COVID restrictions as they ease. We will begin offering more programming and we'll need to bring those part-time staff back on for more hours. The student intern program, however, remains suspended for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Again, because of the limitations of having people in the building, it seemed an inopportune time to bring additional personnel into City Hall until we see where things are going. All salary ranges, positions, and benefits are approved by council as part of the final budget, and the salary ranges will be included at that time. The city typically provides an annual cost of living adjustment to employees. The adjustment is derived from the Consumer Price Index for the County of Los Angeles using an annual percentage from February of each year. The cost of living adjustment of 3.4% last year was not included in the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget as a cost saving measure. The proposed budget includes a 2.2% COLA, which we derived from a blended rate between last year and this year's CPI. This year's CPI was 1%. The cost of that COLA will be approximately $214,000. The city will also reinstate the match for employee contributions to their retirement plan. That program was also cut as a cost saving measure in the current year, and it was done as a one-time cut. So the proposed budget includes bringing that back. The ongoing costs of public employee pensions and retiree health benefits continue to be a difficult topic for many municipalities. CalPERS contribution rates, which are now at 18.6% for classic employees and 7.73% for new employees, it's actually a slight decrease from the current year, which is unusual because it had been going up. However, market losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic mean that CalPERS did not make their target investment rate of 7%. This will affect future year contribution rates for the city. It usually takes them 2 years to build those into what the contribution rates will be. So we won't see it next year. We will probably see it the year after. So when they adjust those discount rates, the city will be responsible for higher annual contributions due to that larger unfunded liability. Every 2 years, the city has Bartel Associates, LLC, prepare an actuarial analysis of the city's CalPER pension plans. They are slated to prepare an updated version this year that will help us plan again in future years for how much our pension contributions will be. Next slide, please. The Public Employees Retirement Pension Reform Act, or PEPRA, was implemented to reduce retiree costs. Any public employee hired after 2013 falls under the PEPRA rules. For the first time in the current fiscal year, the city had a greater number of new employees over classic employees. And we are projecting that that increases in the next fiscal year. And so this is doing exactly what PEPRA was meant to do. It was to sort of cut costs because it kind of overhauled the way those retirements were structured. And the city of Malibu is actually, again, compared to other municipalities, we're a young city and our costs, we don't have a long history of employees. We also don't have public safety employees, meaning we don't have fire, we don't have police. They tend to be the most expensive in terms of pension costs. So actually we're in a very good position. In addition to pension costs, the city will pay $260,000 next year to cover health insurance for its existing retirees. By requiring 5 years of employment before health benefits are vested, the city has limited its future liability. Additionally, the city has been putting money aside since 2009 to cover these costs in the future. And as of this year, the city, unlike many other municipalities, currently has enough reserves in that account for the OPEB liability to be fully funded. So we will make our actual payments and we will continue to contribute a small amount to keep up with inflation, but we are in a very rare position where we have money set aside to cover any unfunded liability at this point. And in our meeting with them this past month, they said most municipalities are only at 25% funded of their liability on the OPEB costs. So that is a testament to plans that, the city has made over all this time to make sure we had money set aside for these, these costs, these mandated costs that we are responsible for. Next slide, please. The proposed budget, as I mentioned, includes an incredibly ambitious capital improvements plan. And we are talking about $36.7 million in capital projects. Ongoing multi-year projects include the street overlay project, which is what Public Works every year does to maintain the quality of roads throughout the city. In the proposed budget, that project is including speed humps in the Point Doom area, just to make sure that that project keeps moving forward. It also includes improvements to Pacific Coast Highway and Westward Beach Road. Construction on phase 2 of the Civic Center water treatment facility will begin in the next fiscal year, and that is mandatory for the city to maintain the timeline necessary to meet the tenets of the MOU with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The permanent skate park project is underway and in design. It is a project that currently only has designated funding of approximately $357,000. That project will need to find additional funding to move forward. So that will be something that staff has to look for in terms of grants and other funding sources. All of these other capital improvement projects come from Measure R, Measure M. These are, grant funded projects. The Civic Center water treatment facility will be probably done with a loan. We are in discussions with the state revolving fund to achieve that. And I really do want to note that no general fund undesignated reserves are going to be used for any of these capital improvements in the following fiscal year. The city, as I said, will use special revenue grants and designated reserves to achieve these projects. Next slide, please. We also have $4.5 million in capital improvements related to the Woolsey fire and severe storms that followed. And we are tracking those in a separate budget page. Most of the projects in the next fiscal year include storm drain and embankment repairs in those damaged areas. And most of those costs will be covered by FEMA, Cal OES, and JPIA, the city's insurance carrier. And the city's share of these projects is estimated, as I mentioned before, to be $1 million, and that will come out of the SCE Woolsey Fire Settlement Fund. Next slide, please. Each year, the council awards funds to local nonprofit groups through the General Fund Grant Program. This year's budget includes $150,000 for those grants. 23 applications have been received as of the deadline, which was March 31st. And those applications total approximately $440,000. The grants will be discussed by the Administration and Finance Subcommittee on May 12th. And the subcommittee's recommendations will be included in the budget item on the May 24th council agenda. Next slide, please. At the start of the current fiscal year, the city had a general fund undesignated reserve of 79% of the annual general fund operating budget. The reserve remains strong even after the use of $13 million of reserves to complete the land acquisition in September of 2018 and the impacts of the Woolsey fire, and strong revenues in the first quarter of fiscal year 2019-2020 contributed to maintaining that reserve going into the COVID-19 pandemic. The council set aside the $6.5 million in a designated reserve for the fiscal year 2021-2022 operating expenditures. And as we mentioned before, the proposed budget uses $5.7 million of that reserve to cover the annual operating expenses. When you look at this graph, you can see that the designated reserves grew significantly in fiscal year 2019-2020, and that's due to the receipt of the one-time SCE Woolsey fire settlement. So that's why that white band becomes bigger in that fiscal year. Even with the decrease in revenues projected under the current economic conditions, the proposed budget provides for a general fund undesignated reserve of 74% of the annual general fund operating budget. Council policy requires that the city maintain at least 50% reserves, and to maintain the highest credit rating, the city must maintain at least 65% in reserves. Next slide. The proposed budget anticipates a starting general fund undesignated reserve of $29.4 million and an ending amount of $28.9 million. Those numbers will change as we go through the budget process. We'll have, as we get more actuals in the current year and get better economic forecasting from various outside agencies will be able to refine those projections. All facility and infrastructure repair projects from the Woolsey fire must be completed by the city and submitted for reimbursement, as I mentioned, from FEMA and Cal OES. And historically, these have taken years to be received. In the proposed budget, we're showing these FEMA costs as a liability against the general fund in the amount of $3.8 million. The SCE Woolsey Fire Settlement Fund is being used for the cost of the city's share of those projects. And based on current year expenditures, the fund will start 2021-2022 fiscal year with $6.9 million and end with $5.8 million. Next slide, please. Looking ahead in our budget process, the next step will be an Administration and Finance Subcommittee meeting on May 5th to discuss the budget. And again, they'll meet on May 12th to discuss the general fund grant applications. The public hearing of the budget will be held on May 24th, and the final budget will be back for review on June 28th. And just so that we can have everything done and ready for July 1st. That concludes the formal presentation. I know we have public speakers, and then we're also here with department heads and other staff in case we need specialty answers to your questions.
Okay, thank you. That was fantastic. You do such a great job at presenting it, Reva and Lisa. Thank you so much. It's a very complex budget, as we know, and the way you lay it out is done really, really well. And I'm super appreciative of that and all the work the staff put into it. So let's go to the public speakers if we can, please.
Yes, we have 3 speakers signed up tonight. They're Cami Winikoff, Doug Stewart, and Scott Jacobs. We'll hear from Cami Winikoff first.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Cami.
Great. I would like to ask for resources in the budget for a dark sky consultant to work with applicants to help design lighting plans correctly. I had agreed with Reva regarding postponing dark sky ordinance compliance because of the impacts of COVID, and that was reasonable. But now, a year later, as the gas stations move forward with revising their current lighting, we have to make sure that it complies with our dark sky ordinance. It's what the community wants and worked very hard to achieve. It's not enough to add money to enforcement. Money has to be added up front so applicants can be assisted in designing proper dark sky lighting. This requires input and review from a licensed professional lighting engineer experienced in dark sky design. We need this very small amount of money in the budget. It's a very small amount and it will gain a very large impact. To save resources, you could have dark sky projects concurrently submitted to planning and building and safety so those departments can work together and share resources to get it right from the start. I just want to thank you all for your consideration in this.
Thank you very much, Cami.
Our next speaker is Doug Stewart. And
Okay,
then I want to add that Chris Frost is also signed up to speak, so we'll hear from him last.
great.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Doug Stewart, Vice Chair of the Public Safety Commission. I'm before you tonight to request that the city address a critical shortfall in the 21-22 draft budget regarding the need for 2 additional sheriff's cars and 4 deputies to be added to our contract coverage. During the last council campaign, we all heard from the residents that public safety and crime problems were top of mind with the voters. The typical question was, we have a crime problem in Malibu, and what are you going to do about it? Well, Malibu doesn't have the big city crime you see on TV news. But when a house is broken in, or guns are on the beach, or someone is killed on PCH, it is a Malibu crime, and the residents want to be protected from it. Public safety by the sheriff and the fire department are the 2 most important duties of our local government. The fire department is a county district, but the sheriff has a contract directly with our city. In June of 2019, the City Council approved a 4-year contract with the sheriff. This is the line item $7,751,000 on page 58 of the proposed budget. This is slightly less than the amount for the current year of $7,781,000 and excludes the special beach patrol, which we do each summer. What this buys us is 26 sheriff's members in total to patrol our city of nearly 20 square miles with a major highway and millions of visitors each year. Just as a comparison, this is about the same budget and number of officers as San Marino has, with about the same number of residents in a 3.5 square mile area and minimal visitors. We are grossly understaffed for public safety, whether it's the number of deputies on the street at any one time, or even the public safety department with only 3.5 staff members out of our city staff of 92. A bare minimum addition right now for the Malibu Sheriff Patrol is to add a third car to the evening shift from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., known as the earlies, and a crime suppression car from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m., both cars 7 days a week. Chris Frost will speak soon about what these 2 additional cars can and will do to improve crime suppression and protect our residents. The need is clear and we know what the solution is. Please put the proposed budget in line with all of our statements that public safety is the #1 priority for Malibu. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Our next speaker is Scott Jacobs.
Unmuting.
I
You
got
there?
I hear you.
Hi, guys. How are you? Hey, I just wanted to thank you. I heard that the Point Doom speed humps. Did I just lose everybody?
Nope, you're here. I hear you.
My screensaver just went. The Point Doom speed humps are in the budget, so I'm very, very excited and thankful for that, seeing as how public safety seems to be and should be and is one of our biggest concerns and part of the budget. So, I'm not quite sure when that will happen. I'm hoping before summer, if possible. That's my biggest hope. If it does, I'd be ecstatic. And if it doesn't, whenever it does, I'm grateful and thankful that you guys are on board with that and that you're going to make it happen for us here, because it's pretty, some of my neighbors are afraid to get the mail. That's all. I just wanted to thank you all for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Our final speaker is Chris Frost.
Good evening, council and staff. I come to you as chair of the Malibu Public Safety Commission. Earlier today, I sent each of you a summary of my position on the permanent funding of 2 additional Los Angeles County Sheriff cars. I believe we all feel the same about the importance of the safety of our community, and each of these cars will fill a much needed protective pocket to help control the crime, the transient behavior, late night problems, criminal and otherwise, street racing, and generally give us a big boost in the safety of our residents and visitors. Referring to the schedule of fund balances, page 1, second item down, general fund designated for year 21-22, there's an amount available of $785,064. I would like to see these funds put toward public safety in the form of the funding of these 2 cars. I believe we can fit them both in if we are creative with the process. Maybe one car becomes a 40-hour car as opposed to a 56-hour car. Whatever way we do it, this is a critical and immediate need. Memorial Day is quickly upon us, and the onslaught of summer throws a whole new dynamic into it, making it all the more imperative that we bring these cars on ASAP. The most important responsibility the city has is the safety and welfare of its residents. Please handle this accordingly. And I also want to thank Lisa for that long and great review of the budget. Very informative, just better than reading it. So thank you, and thank you, Reba, and thank you, council.
Thank you, Chris. Is that it on our public speakers?
That concludes public comment.
Okay, we are back here at the council for a budget workshop here. Who would like to ask questions, make comments first?
Happy to go.
Karen, great.
Okay, thanks to the public speakers, but thank you very much to Riva, Lisa, and all of the staff. I know putting this budget together is a lot of work, and it takes creative thinking, certainly much more than just bean counting. So thank you for that. I want to say I wholeheartedly agree with our two public safety commissioners about the need to bolster public safety. And we do have that $785,000, although I would personally not recommend that we use all of it for those two cars. We are in the pilot program period right now for the one additional car, what's called the Earlies. And I realized we didn't get the shift that we had asked for, but apparently this Earlies shift is extremely beneficial. So I would like to see us continue that. But along with that, we will have expenses for school district separation continuing now that we've checked off the first big event, which was the preliminary hearing this past Saturday. And I am wondering about the dark skies costs, what Cammie had mentioned about a consultant. If there's room to do all three, I think that would be my recommendation. Excuse me, I have a cold. To continue on with the Earlies additional car, one car, and to put some money into our school district separation fund, and to find some money to out of that 785 to make sure that the dark skies ordinance is adequately and timely implemented. So that's mostly all I have to say. Thank you.
Mayor, would you like those questions answered one at a time, or you want to let the whole council go and then answer the question?
I mean, in this format, maybe as we go, because it's kind of later on if you start getting into other areas. So maybe, and they're pretty quick. So I think it'd be
Sure. I just wanted to speak to the dark sky implementation, and I know how important that is for everybody. And we have Yolanda here, but just for the council, just to refresh your memory, one of the reasons that the council decided to postpone implementation of the next phase of the dark sky ordinance is that is requires all commercial properties to come into compliance with the dark sky ordinance. And given that there's been such an impact to commercial businesses throughout the COVID pandemic, that might be a heavy lift, but perhaps Yolanda can speak a little bit more about what those costs might be.
Good evening, City Council. Just a little recap for the dark sky ordinance. Was an ordinance that passed in October 2018. There's 3 phases to this ordinance. The first phase was to have all gas stations under compliance. We're working towards that. There's 7 gas stations in Malibu. So that is coming, it's moving forward slowly. Then the next step, like Riva stated, the next step will be for all commercial projects and recreational zone to be under this compliance. And the third phase will be for residential. As far as a lighting consultant that can assist staff for education, also outreach, complaints, and also plan check for this type of projects, we are estimated possibly $50,000. Just because we have more than 100 staff send notices back in 2020, beginning of 2020, to 107 commercial properties, just the start of the outreach for us. So we are estimating about $50,000. Besides that, I want you also to keep in mind that it's just not leaving everything to the consultant. Staff will also need to get involved on helping out. Mayor Pearson and Council Member Urin were part of the subcommittee presentation for the environmental programs. Under that program, this implementation will follow as far as the outreach that is happening, and the building and safety will take over on the permits and reviews. having said that, with only two staff members, it's going to be challenging, even if $50,000 is given to this for this program for the implementation to be successful. So just your consideration, if you're willing to move this forward and allow those $50,000, please also consider that more staffing is going to be required under the environmental programs. We have a significant amount of regulatory compliance coming ahead. One of them is the SB 1383, which is the recycling of organics, which will take a full staff member and consultants for the implementation for this state requirement that is very critical, that the subcommittee, the environmental subcommittee, will get to learn later on next week. So I just want to wrap it up, but can I just give you a briefing of what it takes, and however you would like us to work on, we're here committed to make it work.
Thank you, Yolanda. Appreciate that. Okay, was there anything else in Karen's comments? Or are we?
I think just to point, oh, sorry.
Sorry, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to point out, I mean, it does say it in the staff report, but the cost of, based on the cost of the trial car, which is $35,000 a month, an additional car will cost for the whole year $420,000. So you need to figure that if you have two, it's going to be twice that. And so we're talking about $840,000. So just so you have the numbers at your fingertips.
Is that a 40-hour or 56-hour car?
I'm 56 hour.
Yeah.
And I just also want to clarify that when the council originally authorized that pilot program, it was supposed to be for the early morning hours, and what we're actually getting based on a recommendation from the station is a crime suppression car, which is a little different, works a little different hours, but the end result is we're definitely getting more officers in the city every single day, targeting direct problems in the afternoon, evening, early morning hours. So just a little bit of clarification there.
One more thing, in terms of school district, just clarifying that we have the $150,000 in city council professional services is slated for the school district consultant. And there's another $150,000 we put into the legal counsel budget to deal with costs that we may have needing help from for those services. So there is $300,000 dedicated to it in the proposed budget. That, of course, if we need to prepare an EIR or something else, those funds are not yet in a budget.
And that will be a requirement, as I think most people know. I guess just the question now is going to be the timing of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next comments? Okay, I guess we're adjourned and we can go home now. No, I'm kidding. Steve had his hand up first. Oh, you're muted.
Mikey, if Paul wants to go first, I got no problem with that. Was that Paul?
Up to you guys.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Here's my take. This is a very conservative budget. And I mean very conservative. They have, typically property values or property taxes increase 5% a year. In this case, we've only got it at 3%. And I can't argue with what they did, because we're looking at a situation that says there's a lot of unknowns. Look, if I were in another city, I'd have a different opinion. But in Malibu, where you never know what the heck's going to happen, I think their approach is exactly the right one. One of the things that concerned me when I read the staff report was the issue that said, look, we can't keep spending more money than we're getting in, right? I mean, we've got to balance this budget. And so what I've asked Lisa and Reva to do, Mikey, for our Administrative and Finance Committee meeting is give us a little view that says, okay, when I go through this year, if I recover at a rate of, 50% or 75%, what's it going to look like when I get to the end of the year, and what the impact's going to be on 2020 or 2022, whatever heck the next. Because if we got a problem, we got to start addressing it early versus waiting till the end. You don't want to get your back against the wall. So hopefully we'll get a little, it may be like, it's going to be rough, and it's not, but it's going to give us at least a 5,000-foot view of what we may have to do in upcoming years. And I think that will be helpful as we go down the line. I agree with all of the comments regarding the Public Safety Commission. I talked to Chris Frost, I talked to Keenan, I talked to Doug Stewart. I think they're absolutely correct. Public safety is one of our big issues. So Mikey, when I get to the end of this, or however we're going to do this, I would like to make a motion to make sure that when we get to our Administrative and Finance Committee meeting, that staff has got the money for those police cars included in that budget, so we can figure out how to get that done, because I do think that is something we're going to want to do. There is $9 million that we're spending on these rebuilds, right? I mean, I think that's a number that we're 9 million plus. And we brought it up earlier that said, what we're also spending money on are these people who are coming in with serial developments, where they come in with whatever they have in the beginning to try and get the funds dismissed. And then 2 weeks later, a week later, they come back with an additional development piece. And at least, we ought to think about that, because what we're doing, I don't have a problem helping the people out that are really need the help because they're dealing with insurance or whatever. But the folks that are coming in with, serial developments where I'm putting a house together and putting more houses together, they seem to me to be not the people who really need the funds that we're trying to do. And I can't remember the exact number, but that could be about $500,000 over the course of the next year. So we may just want to rethink and sort of say, look, if you're doing a like for like or like plus 10%, we'll give you the relief on the building fees. But if you're doing this serial development, that $500,000 can help us fund some of these cars that we're looking at coming down the line. The only other thing that I would, we're going to have our one thing, the Administrative and Finance Committee, or on the schedule that Rita showed us, we're going to have the Administrative and Finance Committee meeting. And then I think she suggested her next review of the budget was going to be someplace in January of 2022. Is that, I can't remember, Reva, whatever that number was.
You'll have a chance, sorry to interrupt, look at the first quarter. That will be at the beginning of November. You'll get the first quarter report.
Okay,
So
we had that report, we had that review in August, I think, of this year, someplace, right? Where we reviewed last year.
Current fiscal year, we added for the first time, because of the uncertainties of COVID, an additional review in August. And, we can certainly track things as the summer progresses and bring it forward if we see any, big red flags, or continue on the regular schedule.
If we can't I think you're right. Keep it on your radar screen. If we see stuff going on that is going to have an impact on the budget, I think we want to know about that earlier rather than later, right? I mean, if we're going to do this thing right, let's make sure we get the information we have in our hands to do that. And then the only other thing I would suggest that the council do, okay? And I'm not sure how we exactly get this into are there additional revenue sources we should be looking at, right? I mean, as we're looking down the line, are there things that maybe can help us deal with some of this? There are things like, parking meters, there are increases in sales taxes people have proposed. There are, mansion sales transfer taxes people have put. I just think I don't have to we don't have to decide on any of those right away, but I do think this kind of stuff we want to start thinking about, because I'm not sure, I have no idea. Is COVID over? Don't know. When's our next disaster coming? Beats the hell out of me. But everybody I've talked to that has ever run a municipal government, been involved in municipal government, says you can't have enough money stacked in away someplace to deal with all this stuff that's going to hit you. So, I think as we look down the line, let's see where the numbers take us for this year and for next year. But somewhere down the line, we may want to start thinking about putting some additional revenue away someplace to make sure we can handle all the stuff that's eventually going to come at us, because we're living in Malibu, and sooner or later it's coming. So, Mikey, that's all I got.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Paul, I think you were next.
Thank you. I just wanted to start by saying thank you very much to Riva and Lisa, who spent an hour and a half with me going over this so that I would have a little better handle on what's going on. The remarks I've heard so far about where we need to spend money are right in line with what I have been told by people out there. People really like the fact that we've got the extra car. It's been helpful. I think that we need to have a strong police presence to keep this summer from turning into last summer. Last summer was a zoo. I think if we really want us to have a temporary parking area for the tow trucks, I want to be able to do that. Last year, those people who were kind enough to park improperly ended up helping our budget out and learning something at the same time, hopefully. So I would love to see people behaving in such a fashion that we don't need tow trucks, that we don't need extra police cars, but all signs are that we do. So I'm very much in favor of that. I'm glad that we have some money set aside to pursue the school unification, which would be lovely. And like Steve, I also think that additional revenue sources would be great. For years, I've thought that one of the things we could kill two birds with one stone with is parking meters. I've talked to the Coastal Commission about it. I've talked to other people. We have so many people who come out here and park all day or park oversized vehicles all day, and they don't contribute anything. And when people come out to go to the beach, they end up driving up and down the coast without seeing any place to park. And then they do something stupid with parking meters. At least while the other people are parked there, they're contributing something to help pay for the police, which I think we need. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Bruce?
Thank you. Sure. So thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure I agree with Steve that this is a very conservative budget, because I'm new to this, but looking at the materials we've been given, and I'm talking about the notebook that was summarized, but I've gone through this notebook. I only understand the past 3 years because that's what's being given to us. If you only look at the past 3 years, we're in a much worse place than it sounds, because we started out, for example, according to this information, before the Woolsey fire, $80 million in revenue, and then we dropped off a cliff for the next 2 years. We're slowly rebounding, maybe. We don't know what the future holds, negative or positive. I don't see how we get back to 80 million this year, which is what's projected. I hope I'm just completely off base on that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the revenues in fiscal year 18-19 included all of the money that came in to buy the vacant land. So it's all of the debt service. So it's a skewed revenue number for that year. That was a one-time thing.
I don't understand how expenses come into affecting what the revenue is. I thought revenue is what we bring in, and then separately I was going to talk about the outflow next. That I would think the vacant land is an outflow. Am I missing something?
Yeah, so if you look on page Roman number 3, that's the easiest way to look at it.
That's where I'm looking. Thank you.
Revenue summary by fund. The top part is general fund, and it'll show general fund revenue at $35 million. And then right below it, it shows land acquisition, which were our certificates of participation that we issued, which are the bonds, at $32 million. So it's actually reflected as revenue because we received it and then spent it because we borrowed money. So it's showing the money that came in. So the actual general fund revenue for fiscal year 18-19 was, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on, $35.2 million was the actual number. And then again, in 19-20, you see that number skewed at $53 million because right above that number, the SCE Woolsey fire settlement came in at 13.5. So the more realistic general fund number is somewhere in that 35 billion dollar number.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So okay, so that alleviates that concern I had going through this notebook. I appreciate that. So where that gets us then though is we're at 80 million projected in revenue, and I get that maybe that is conservative. I hope it is, and a little less than 90 million in expense. So we've got a $9 to $10 million shortfall this year projected, about 12% difference.
And can I just clarify that for you too? So there's a couple things that factor into that, those expenses being more than the revenue coming in. One are the FEMA and OES projects where we will spend the money, but they're reimbursable and they take a long time. So if I'm spending $4.5 million, in this budget, I'm only expecting that FEMA is going to pay me 1.5 potentially next fiscal year. So we're carrying that cost. Additionally, some of those costs are drawdowns on general fund designated reserves. So for example, the $6.5 million that we set aside in the current year is being used. So it's part of the expenditures, but it's not part of the revenue. And you're right, we want to be matched, but that I don't want you to think that whole 9 million is the delta. So
thank you, Lisa. You got ahead of me. I was actually going to say next. I understand.
Okay.
I do understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's
the
okay.
important numbers to focus on are those general fund monies coming in and out, and the special revenues and the grants and FEMA and the wastewater project, and all of that is of less concern for it to match from year to year.
Right. I get all that. I appreciate that. That's one thing I actually did understand. So, but we're still at a deficit this coming year based on the current projections, and hopefully, as Steve says, the revenue projections are very conservative, and we'll end up being very surprised. They'll be much better. But I would like to, I have a lot of detailed notes. I fly-spec this and tried to find different places to cut expenses, and using my own red pencil, but not really understanding all that well exactly how every department in the city works and all the projects. I came up with maybe $1 million in expenses I could cut, cutting 10,000 there, 50,000 there, 100,000 here, but that doesn't solve the whole. And I understand the hole's not horrible because we have money we can tap to get there, but I would hope that as we continue to develop this budget over the next 30 to 60 days, somebody that does understand all of these expenses much better than I do will take a sharp red pencil to them, or red pen to them, and try to cut some of the expense that we really don't need to spend, because I think there are things in here that can be cut. I am concerned because I've only been on council for a few months. It seems to me like practically every meeting, maybe every other meeting in the consent calendar, we have an approval of an overage on a contract. We've been redoing contracts to add additional expense, anywhere from 10% to last week as much as I think it was 30-something% on a roadway improvement project. And I get that that's being paid for by state funds, but I also understand, if I'm correct, the state funds that we're now spending more of on that project, we would have otherwise had available to spend on some other projects that we're going to end up dipping into our own money perhaps in the coming year or two to spend for. So I just want to make sure that we're being I like being conservative. I like not only being conservative on the income, but I view being conservative on the outflow being to over expect what you might have to spend so that you don't have any major surprises. And I just want to make sure when we get the next report, someone's taken a very close look at this and we're not going to get surprises on the expense side, and perhaps we can lower some. But I have a lot of
Can I
specific
just jump in?
questions.
Before we lose some of the things that you raised, I just want to make
Go
sure
ahead.
I speak to them. One, I just want to point out that what we're projecting for this current fiscal year that we thought was going to be the worst year ever is actually $37.8 million in the general fund. So in my history of doing these budgets, it typically ends up that we catch up to the prior fiscal year. Even during the recession, we didn't see our revenues dip down. So as you know, Steve said, this is a very, very conservative first go around. As we get more data over the next 45 days, we'll be able to refine that projected budget general fund amount considerably. And then I just did want to speak to what you had asked about the overage in that one contract for Measure R. We actually stayed within the allowable grant funds for that project. That was always allocated to that project.
And I would add that when we were talking about, so there's two different kinds of those Measure R and Measure M funds. And so when Riva was talking about some of those special revenue funds that are allowable for city uses, right? Some of those funds are allowable for street maintenance, as an example. Those are not the same funds. Those are annual allocations that get sent to the city, and we can then spend on those projects. These grant funded projects are completely separate. So those two pots are different pots within Measure R and Measure M. And those are, so if you look at the fund balance page, which is, I think page I, you can see that there are, so there's traffic safety fund, there's a Measure R fund, there's a Measure M fund. Those are the city's annual allocations of those dollars, and we try to fill where we can, where it's allowed. We use those for street maintenance, some other, other costs like that. The grants that you see for all the capital improvements are captured in the funds that come in on that line on the grants funds. So, and as Riva had mentioned, for the Civic Center project, a certain amount of those dollars were allocated, and we were not exceeding that. We just were adding to the contract itself. There's a bigger pot that may be allocated by the grantor based on our estimates, because it includes a variety of things, and we don't necessarily award a contract to the full amount of the grant funds that have been allocated by Metro.
Okay, there's a lot of detail in there to unpack. I'm not going to waste anyone's time doing that on this meeting.
Okay.
Bruce, can I add one thing?
Talking so I can get it. I'm sorry?
Can I add one thing that might help?
Yeah.
If you have a list of items, it'd be helpful to submit so Steve and I can look at that and talk to staff and unpack it. So that would be really helpful.
That was where I was headed. That's what I'll do. I'll need to get some guidance from John on how I'm allowed to do that in terms of, we already have two people that are on the council who are that committee, and I don't understand the rules of the road in terms of me being a third member of council, providing those kinds of questions or information to the two of you, but we'll work that out. But that's exactly where I was headed. Was I'm not going to waste anyone's time going into all those little details now. I'm sure I'll get the answers before the next meeting. Same thing with all the little details I have. So you've answered the big picture items, questions that I had. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the presentation and all the work that's in this. The public doesn't see this very thick notebook with very small print. So my eyes are very tired actually after looking through it all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, Steve.
Mikey, and I understand Bruce's concern about the expenses and the budget. And I think, to me, the most concerning item in the whole staff report was the one that said, look, this year we're spending more than we're bringing in. And as you look forward, you can't, that is not a sustainable process to take place. So that's why I've asked for this little review that can give us some vision of what may be happening at the end of the year. And, I'm just, and this is, for Bruce, this is a very, very conservative budget. I mean, they have not, that, there's no optimism with these two folks. I love them, but they're not up, there's no optimism sitting. And I when I read, for example, I was reading something in the Boston Globe, Cape Cod this year. You can't rent a place down in Cape Cod because they're already covered, right? Everybody wants to get the hell out of their house. They're tired of looking at their spouse, and they want to go someplace else. So the Cape is full. Now, I can't translate what's going on in the Cape to what's going to go on to Malibu, but it certainly appears to be some effort by people to get out and do something. LL Bean has got a project where they are massively increasing their inventory because they anticipate a huge spending spree that's going to take place this summer. So I don't know. I mean, how do those things translate to Malibu? I can't tell you, but I'm a little bit more optimistic than our two friends here who did the budget that says we've got some opportunities as we move down the line to sort of catch up with some of the stuff that we lost during the pandemic and the fire. And I'm just keeping my fingers crossed, hoping that occurs. So for whatever that's worth.
Steve, Paul?
I just want to second what Steve said about how conservative this is. And when I say it's a conservative budget, if anything, they tend to underestimate income, and they tell us the worst case for the income and the best case for the expenses. I mean, the highest case, well, the worst for each, actually. And as far as what Steve said about not being able to get a place in Cape Cod, the rental prices in Malibu for this summer are higher than last year. It's very hard to find anything out there. The sales that are happening are higher than a normal year-to-year variation would indicate. And I think that we're going to get a pleasant surprise with the property tax receipts, even though we only get 7% of those. And I'm hoping.
And I will point out again, last year when we did the adopted budget, we started with an adopted budget of $34.7 million in the general fund, and we're predicting 37.8. So if we just trend along that, we're going to make up a lot of those funds.
Steve?
And I just have not done this yet. I want to thank both Riva and Lisa for the effort they put into this thing, because I think they've done a hell of a job. And they did both take the time to talk to me and sort of walk me through this thing, which gave me another, an in-depth perspective of what's going on. So I just think that I thank them all for doing that. Thank you.
Okay. Bruce?
Yeah, just one last question. So, I mean, however difficult it may be, is there any way that we can improve our 7 cents on the dollar in terms of what we get from the property taxes, or is that set in stone like the 10 Commandments?
It's set in stone. Unfortunately, we've looked at that multiple times throughout the years, and it's a rate that's set when a city incorporates, and the rate is determined based on when you incorporated based on other cities. And so since Malibu incorporated late, because we're a younger city, we have a much lower rate than the older cities, because there's not that much left in the pie to get when we got there.
Okay, thanks.
Good explanation. All right. Okay. I've got a bunch of comments. Like everyone, I appreciate going in conservative. It's smart. We don't know what the hell's going to go on. Hopefully, I know California is super low in COVID, but it's not other places. We don't know what's going to happen there. Our fuel moisture load right now is, while it's good because of this time of year, it's way lower than the Woolsey year at this time. Very concerning. So yes, we're smart to be conservative. I want to talk about other funding sources. That's a really good comment. I've always had in my mind, this is the way my mind works. 15 million visitors, 10 cents a visitor, 1.5 million. $1 a visitor, $15 million. So that's the way I'm constantly thinking. That's where I came up with raising TOT. It's like, what can we do? So let's all as a council keep our eyes and ears on that, because if we can find those incremental things to increase revenue that, don't hurt our citizens and help the city, that's a win-win to me. On the
And
parking
Mayor, that might be a good thing to direct tonight to A&F to discuss in more detail.
Okay, ANF, you hear that? Get on that, ANF. We expect results too. Quickly. Cammie's sitting there going, you need to come through on this right now. And I don't blame her. By the way, we've looked at parking meters in the past, and there's a couple things I just want to point out on that. It's not really part of this, but number one, we don't own some of the prime areas to put parking meters. So there's always that little issue, the highway. And if we do meters, which we looked at extensively in the past, I just beg we vote never to do individual meters by each car space. I would absolutely go insane. That is not rural at all. So just that's my thought on that. I also want to add that I think in my mind right now, and I know I take responsibility for the $9 million in fee waivers, and I think this is the last year. And Steve raised another point that we'll discuss in ANF as well, but I think that's the last year. So there, I'm hoping $2.5 to $3 million next year's budget right away. We've paid a huge price to help out our friends and neighbors that burned down, and I stand by it. But I think this is the last year in my mind at this point. I can't see another reason. The last surge is now actually starting to work their way into the system. And so at least from what I see. So that's good. I agree on the comments on public safety. Chris and Doug, hear you loud and clear. Plus, I think Chris would strangle me if I said different. So I'm scared of him a little bit. So I don't want to say that. No, I actually, I'm really impressed with the people we have. It's just, the amount of visitors we get is just overwhelming. And I just don't think we can think it's not going to be overwhelming again. It's clear that Malibu is a go-to place. So $1 per visitor, that's the goal. And we're going to take care of a lot of issues. I saw a hand up, I thought, briefly when I was, oh, Steve?
Just Mike, I had suggested we put a motion, whether it's a motion or how you do it, that when we get to our administration and finance committee, that the staff figure out how we pay for those 2 police cars. So we at least got that incorporated into the budget, because I think that's a biggie. That just to me is, it's a no-brainer. So you can
it's clear, and based on my talks with our captain and our lieutenant, they essentially, when I said, what do you need? That was their answer. And we're pretty much doing all the things they asked for. That, and they want us to improve our technology. So we're looking to, we bought a couple of what they call, I just forgot the name, the
LiDAR guns. And
LiDAR.
I actually authorized another one today for one of our traffic cars. But, one of the things I wanted to just jump in and weigh in is that pilot program cost that we are using, which is that 400,000 and change. We might be able to reduce it a little bit, because there is an opportunity sometimes to get a deputy and a trainee, and that trainee cost for those first 2 years is actually less than a full deputy who's no longer a trainee. So we can talk to contract law and see if we can tweak some of those numbers if you're really interested in getting 2 full more cars.
Okay. The other thing I want to say, this is the no fun part. So I spent time talking to all of the department heads before this meeting, and there was a very consistent, unified theme in that. They are completely overwhelmed. They are maxed out. They cut in people last year, and the amount of projects we all want done is overwhelming. And that's a problem. We have a massive list of approved projects, which I assume you all got a glance at in the back, but we haven't even begun. And then all of us, every one of us here, including me, have all sorts of projects we want to bring in. So we have a real problem there. And it's not really of our making, it's just what landed on us. A lot of the projects that are there were brought up by previous councils, and they're all, as far as I can tell, there's nothing wrong with any of them, they're great. And some of them are on my list too, as my priorities. And I have a whole priority list I wrote up, and then I started looking at the budget and I'm like, oh, this is not going the way I want. So I find this painful, but I want to say that in my opinion, that for this first quarter, we should park bringing forward, other than maybe what we've talked about tonight, we should park bringing forward any more projects, either new or that are already approved that we're not talking about now. And we should ask our commissioners to do the same. We need to see where this economy is going. And God only knows if it's turning around the right way. We can, get in the mud pit and wrestle for what we can add to it. But let's go to at least the next quarter and the quarter after. And there's another thing that will happen is you'll notice in this budget that we are adding some of those people back. And I'm glad, because our staff is fried right now. It's just been a lot. And they've been working, trying to do the same thing we've all been in this COVID world. It's exhausting. But bringing people back when you work with large organizations often slows you down for a little bit while you reintegrate. That's my experience often. And it's just get new people and everything's great. They're off and going. They gotta be trained and brought into the system and into the culture. So I think it's gonna be, I'm gonna try and be hopeful because I tend to be overly optimistic. But A&F for sure, we'll look at this after quarter by quarter as closely as we can so that, with this budget, we don't even start hiring back people really till July 1st. And that process, is not overnight in government. It's not like private business where you hire people and get them on the ground right away. You have to put it out there and it takes a little while. So I think there's going to be a flow to this, and I just wanted to be like transparent about what that flow might look like. We need to get through this a little further, and in my opinion, and I wanted, honor the department heads and help them get through this and get their staffs back and growing. And it's just not going to happen overnight. But we need to be on top of that, because I too am really excited for all the cool projects I want to bring forth. So I think I saw Steve's hand up.
I was saying some of the positions, Mikey, we've already approved. So they just got to fill them. So hopefully they'll be able to get those done before we get to our budget meetings later on.
Well,
Yolanda's got a position that was approved. I think
there's current vacant positions that we're recruiting for right now. The city clerk, the deputy city clerk, the deputy for Yolanda. But the proposed budget includes 6 new positions, which I believe Mikey was talking about. Right,
the equivalent of 6 full-time, but it's actually more people. So it's going to take, hiring is not an overnight thing is all I'm saying. So,
and in regard to the commissions, in prior years, what we have always done is brought the commission work plans forward to the city council in January. And then the council goes ahead and adopts a budget and a work plan, and they don't always jive with what the commission work plans are set out to do. So what we've done this year is waited to bring those commission work plans forward until you all look at the budget and the work plan, and then based on the work plan, we'll bring forward the commission budget work plans in a future meeting.
Okay. Bruce?
Yeah, just as a big picture item, the idea, Mikey, I like the idea of transforming a penny or 10 cents into $1 per person that's here. That's great. But by the same token, our largest revenue source right now, if I understand it, is property tax, because our properties are valuable. I don't believe that multiple tourists transforms into valuable properties. In fact, I think there's perhaps a reverse correlation there. And consistent with our vision and our mission, which I think are designed to enhance people wanting to live here and own property here, and that property be more valuable. I just don't want us to be a community that becomes dependent upon tourist revenue, because that's the beginning of the end for a coastal city. We become Manhattan Beach. We want to be Malibu, and I'd rather see ways that we make Malibu an even more attractive place to buy a home than a place to spend money when you're visiting.
I could not agree more. And I was more just playing a little number game. My vision, if I was to be king of Malibu, which, I'm going to overthrow the government soon, so we'll see what happens. But there's a gate and it comes down, and those tourists that are coming, hey, how many people in the car? Hey, $4. Okay, and you go. But they're coming anyhow. So I don't want to bring in more tourists by any means. It just kills me that there's 15 million people coming here every year, and we hardly capture a freaking cent out of them. I'd like them to pay their way. That's all. I don't want, I'd rather cut it down to, like, let's just say, pick a number, 7.5 million, but they pay $5 each, to enjoy an uncrowded Malibu. So that's the way my brain works. It thinks of numbers that way. But and that would raise property values, to your point. So, Paul, you're muted.
Just going to do something along the lines that you just did. We have to constantly remember that LA County has over 10 million people in it. And a good portion of that is right over the hill or down at the end of the Highway 1 where it hits Santa Monica. And every warm day, they want to come here. And they're going to come here whether it's free or whether it's $10, as Mikey is hoping for, or whether it's $15. That's a natural flow that Malibu has always experienced. And if we can get people who are thinking, this is nice and I want to behave here, I'll be as happy as I can be. Thank you.
You make an interesting point. Paradise Cove in the summer charges $50 a vehicle, and they're packed. I mean, people like, how about the people parking at Point Doom illegally at the headlands and paying $60 and just thanking the person writing the ticket as they're parking? They don't care. So it's a conundrum there, and I don't know if we'll ever solve it, but that's up to the A&F committee, and Steve's gonna subcommittee. Steve's gonna figure it all out by the time we have our meeting. So I just want to say lastly here, or maybe lastly, to remind our audience, which is looking like Chris Frost and Cammie Winikoff at the moment, unless anyone else is seeking there. This is still a budget workshop. The budget's not done. So nothing that we're talking about now is happening next week. So this is a process, so which I know for both of you is probably as frustrating as it is for us. And certainly when I ran for city council, I thought it'd be the best of financial times and not the opposite. So anyhow, I just want to remind you that this process, we're rolling through it. And with that, I don't think we need Elisa, but
no, I just want to get a little clarity, and I too would like to thank Chris and Cammie, because in all my years here, not as many as Riva, you would think that this is something where we would get a lot of public participation, and we historically don't. We're trying to spell it out for people. This is how we're spending your money. We're producing this document. It gets posted on the website. We make a presentation, and we will continue to do a presentation at the future 2 meetings for the council as well. And we historically don't get a lot of public participation. So, we're here. We're happy to answer questions. We would love people to look at it. So that was my first point. My second thing is I do thank you, Mayor, for talking about the work plan. I just want to be clear, because we have it. This is our moment to kind of make some decisions. We gave you it's a long work plan, and then we gave you a long list of postponed things. We're just looking for direction. Like, you're good with the work plan currently as presented? Certainly over the course of the year, if things need to be added, that could happen depending on, where we are. We want to make sure there's nothing on there that gives you pause or needs to be changed, because this is also how we develop the budget based on these activities. We, for the first time, put in there some of the ongoing duties and tasks that fall to every department. We certainly didn't capture everything, but we felt like it was a good place to kind of show those ongoing pieces, some of which Riva described in her slides. But if you could just give us direction on that, that will help us. I mean, we definitely heard public safety cars and including that for the next round. If there's anything else you want to see specifically, and in the work plan too, because as Riva said, that's what we're going to give to department heads to help them craft those commission budgets, work plans, sorry, the commission work plans that will come back to you. So just want to make sure you guys are all good with where we stand today.
I think we all have a list of things we'd like to see. And I'll just repeat, I really think we need to pause right now, sadly. And it's really painful for me. There's stuff I really, really am passionate about, mostly all to do with the environment and mostly. But I don't see I think it'd be just foolish with, staff being just maxed out. Taking a conservative approach is agreed by all 5 of us here. I just think this is where we're at. And I personally, there's nothing, I think you've done a fantastic job. I mean, the basic functions of the city are the majority of what we do. And that's dictated by actually law. So, which I don't know if a lot of people know that. I think, yes, we'll tweak some things as we get closer, and A&F, I think, has an idea of what we want to look at to figure out. I think, hey, I'm going to say to Chris and Cammie, and Doug was here, showing up, and Scott, who was here, showing up and speaking up makes a difference. It always does. And I know you're not giant crowds, but you guys have, you guys' voices are heard loud and clear, and I think that's fantastic. I really appreciate how much you both at this point, and Scotty and Doug too, care about the city and are tracking this and willing to put in your own time and hours on projects that you're passionate about and we're all passionate about, and that should be mentioned. So thank you both. Paul, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell Lisa, if she wants bigger crowds next time, just have us not do stuff that people want done, and they will show up in droves. Right now, we are fortunate that we've done some stuff that, as far as controlling the vehicles on the highway and all of that, and people are feeling like we're on a better path. We're going more towards the Malibu they want. And I think that the people who did show up are really enthusiastic about the fact that we are on the path, and they want to make sure that we get there. And I think that that's mostly large happy crowd would be great, but I'll settle for a small enthusiastic crowd gladly.
And educated.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the 2 or 3 people that are watching.
Right.
There's more than that.
People watching, we don't know. I hope. Steve?
Yeah, I second Chris Frost and Doug Stewart and Keenan on the Public Safety Commission. I don't know how many residents know who the public safety commissioners are, but they are probably your best friends here in Malibu. Those people work very hard and they are smart, and they call me up and they say, here's what you should be doing. And I've not found them to ever be wrong. Right. So, and I do appreciate that. And Cammie on the other side is passionate over this dark sky component. I agree with her. I was part of the team that helped put that together. I agree with her 100%. And the more passionate people we have helping us, the better job we're going to be able to do. So I thank them both very much.
Okay, so do you, Lisa, Riva, do you feel like we have direction for A&F? I think it's a little tiny list. I think we got it, right?
Yes.
Okay, do we need a motion on that, or are we? I don't think, so.
Mayor
Yeah,
Pearson, you do not need a motion. As long as staff feels they have sufficient direction,
Cool.
no motion is necessary.
All right. Mike, you ready to adjourn?
okay, we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second.
What, Bruce's hand? Bruce's
That's
hand.
okay. I'll get my answer offline. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, or we can have a second and then hear your question. I just want, you know, to complete the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, and you have a question?
No, I'm cool.
Oh, okay. Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Euring,
Yes.
Councilmember Silverstein,
Yes.
Councilmember Fair,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Grisanti,
Yes.
Mayor Pearson.
Yes, and our meeting ends at 7:59. It's amazing we beat 8 o'clock. I'm glad we can get the staff home earlier than anyhow, won't talk about the later times. So thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated.
Guys, thank you all you did a hell of a job. Thank you very much. This was a good meeting. Thank you.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Adios.
Good job, everyone.